to CTEC-270, Relational Database Coding. My name is Professor Keyvan Shahrdar. I'm an adjunct professor of computer science at Bossier Parish Community College. If you need help or assistance, do not hesitate to contact me by email at kshardar@bpcc.edu, or you could text or phone me at 318-453-8082. Let's get started with our presentation. This is chapter 1. This is our week 1 presentation, an introduction to relational databases and SQL. The objectives is to identify the 3 main hardware components of a client-server system, describe the way a client accesses the database on a server using these terms: application software, data access API, database management system, SQL query, and query results. Describe the way a database is organized using these terms: tables, columns, rows, and cells. Describe how the table is a relational database and related using these terms: primary key and foreign key. Identify the 3 types of relationships that can exist between 2 tables. Describe the way the columns in a table are defined using these terms: data type, null value, default value, and identity column. Describe the relationship between standard SQL and Microsoft SQL Server's Transact SQL. Describe the difference between DML statements and DDL statements. Describe the difference between an action query and a select query. List 3 coding techniques that can make your SQL code easier to read and maintain. Explain how views and stored procedures differ from SQL statements that are issued from an application program. Describe the use of command, connection, and data reader objects when .NET application access a SQL Server database. Now, all this information that I went over might be a little confusing for you at this time, but this is just a presentation. Just take it all in, and during the course of the semester, you will learn about each and every single one of them. During this presentation, we will go into details for all of those things that I just mentioned, but again, just try to understand it, just get familiar with it, and we will get into details as the semester goes on. This is a simple client-server system. So you have a database server, you have your client. Your client will be your laptop or your desktop, and then you have some sort of network. The network will also be the internet, and we get access to the database. The 3 hardware components of a client-server system are client, server, and network. Terms to know about client-server systems is local area network, which is a LAN, wide area network, which is a WAN, and an enterprise system. Client software, server software, and the SQL interface. So normally you're going to have your laptop or your desktop, and that will connect to a database server that's on the network. So you're going to have queries that you send to that SQL server, and then it sends back the results that you're looking for. So some server software. So you have a database management system that's called a DBMS. So what the DBMS does is gives you the ability to connect to the SQL server, and you could run code inside of it. And that's what your homework assignment is today, and we will discuss that later in this video. Then you have client software, such as application software, data access API, application programming interface. That's what API stands for. And the client software does the front end processing. The SQL interface, the application software continues with the DBMS by sending SQL queries through the data access API. When the DBMS receives a query, it provides a service like returning the requested data, the query results, to the client. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, which is the standard language for working with a relational database. Client server versus file handling system. A client server system. Processing is divided between client and server. File handling systems, all processing is done on the client. So a Windows-based system that uses an application server. So you have your client, that's your desktop or laptop, and then it will connect to an application server. So it's any type of server. It could be like a Windows server. And then from that server, it will connect to the SQL server where you'll have access to the database. Now, let me explain. That SQL server could be in that web server that you connected to as well, or it could be in a different server. So this is a simple web-based system. So you have your client or your browser, that would be your laptop or desktop, connects to the internet, and then connects to a web server. So this way, whenever you let's say you connect to target.com, you're connecting to their web server. And then once you're in their web server, let's say if you want to go shopping and get a list of, I don't know, shelves that they may have. So it filters that information and sends an SQL query stating them, hey, show me all of the products that you have that are shelves. And then it returns that back to the web server while it serves that response to you. Other client-server system architecture. So there are application servers that store business components, and web server store web applications and web services. So how does web applications work? A web browser on a client sends a request to a web server. The web server processes that request. The web server passes any request from that data to the database server. The database server returns the results to the web server, and the web server returns the response to the browser. That's what we just discussed in the previous slide. So the vendor table of an accounts payable database. So again, I know this might be all complicated for you, but I think the important part here is, so you see vendor ID, vendor name, vendor address 1, vendor address 2, vendor city, and as you could see this here, it probably goes further, but these things here are called columns. So you have your vendor ID, sorry, you have your vendor ID, so you have a list of vendor IDs, and those are associated with a vendor name. So this here is called a row, if you could see that right there. So row 1 has vendor ID 1, and the vendor name is the U.S. Postal Service, and this is the address 1, address 2, city, etc. So this is how you sort of visualize what a database looks like. So you're going to have columns and you're going to have rows. So these are some terms to know about a database table. So you have a relational database, you have tables, columns, rows, cells, you have a primary key, a composite primary key, non-primary key, and an index. And we'll discuss primary keys, composite keys, and non-primary keys later in the semester as well. So again, as I stated, this may sound a little confusing at this time, but it will be much better as we go through the semester. The relationship between two tables. So let's say that we want to get the name of our vendors, right? And their invoices. So you see how you have this vendor ID here, and it's for Federal Express Corporation. So by knowing the vendor ID, so you query, hey, I want to know Federal Express invoices. So you query Federal Express, it tells you, hey, they have a vendor ID 113, and then you say, okay, I want to get that, 123, I want to get that 123, and everybody that has an invoice that has a vendor ID of 123, give me a list for that. And here you see how it says it's a foreign key. So what a foreign key is, it's a constraint that sort of makes sure that whatever vendor ID is in this table is in the primary key table as well. And that's what a primary key is. So it's a unique key. And there is only one of that specific keys. So it's a unique key that you're going to have. So relational database terms, foreign key, we spoke a little bit about that. So we have one-to-many relationships, one-to-one relationships, and many-to-many relationships. And we'll discuss this further in the semester as well, what they mean. So this here is a DBMS. So you are going to have a DBMS installed in your system. So what uh, I would do is I will go into your search engine and you would type in SQL Management Studio download. That's the Microsoft download for an SQL Server Management Studio. So you click on the link, and here gives you how you could download SQL Management Studio. So you click on that, and then you're able to download the studio. It will also download an express version of SQL. So make sure that you get that done because you're going to need it during the course. You're also going to need it for this homework assignment. But this is how it looks like. So, it has databases, and, this one has an AP database. Uh, and then it says, well, these are the tables inside of the AP database. And the tables are contact updates, GL accounts, invoice archive, etc. It says DBO in the front name of it, but that's the naming structure that they have. And here, so he got the invoices table, right? So you're going to have a table, and here you're going to have the columns and the rows. Well, actually, this is the creation of that table that you're doing. So here you're saying, hey, we're going to have a column named invoice ID. We're going to have a column named vendor ID. We're going to have a column named invoice number, invoice date, invoice total, this. So here you're actually creating the table through this. Common SQL Server data types. So these are storage types. So this is what you need to somewhat wrap around your head. So bit uh, is a type of storage data type that allows you to store data. So bit is the smallest, and then you have int or big int, small int, or tiny int. Then you have money or small money, which is really currency. Decimal, which has a decimal point, or numeric. Then you have float or real, which has a decimal point, but it has more. Um, it could have more floating numbers versus a decimal. Then you have datetime, which formats a number according to the date. Uh, and then you have a char or varchar, uh, and this is really an nchar and nvarchar. This is really what you use most of the time for string data types. And then you have a data type, you have a null value. So null values are unique to SQL. Basically, they have no value. Then the default value, and then the identity column. So an identity column, um, we will go over in the semester as well. So it identifies that column. How relational databases and conventional file systems differ. So you have data definition, maintenance, validity checking, relationships, and data access. So what does this mean? So obviously you have data definition, what type of data is it that you're storing. You can maintain it. You have validity checking. So that means, so you're constraining values in those databases to make sure that other tables contain them. Relationships are ways that you're able to have relationships between tables in order to query a specific view or information that you're looking for. And obviously you have data access, so access to the data that you need. How relational databases differ from hierarchical and network database systems. So supported relationships, one-to-many, one-to-one, many-to-many, and ad hoc relationships. Um, Again, we'll go over this again. So one-to-many means that you could have, uh, one table that could have many relationships. One-to-one means one-to-one relationship. Many-to-many means many-to-many. So again, we'll go over this as the semester goes on. We have data access, how physical database structure affects application programming, and maintenance, how table definition changes after application programming. This is some of the history of SQL. So Dr. E.F. Codd, he's the one who pioneered the relational database model. And in 1978, IBM developed a predecessor to SQL called Structured English query language, or SQL. And then in 79, the Relational Software Inc., later named Oracle, released their first DBMS, which was named Oracle, which was very big at the time, and you were able to finally manage files in a computer system as if you had a filing cabinet. And then in 82, IBM released the first relational database system, which is SQL-DS, or SQL Data System. And in 85, IBM released DB2, or Database 2. And in 87, Microsoft released SQL Server. And in 89, ANSI published the first set of standards for SQL. That's so everybody would somewhat have the same type of way to query the information, but their systems will be different, and they are even today, but the way you query the information is all the same. ANSI revised in 92, they revised standards, and they've been revising ever since, and we have been updating SQL. So this is Murex SQL Server 2016. I think we're in 2020 now, something to that effect. So standard SQL. So how knowing standard SQL helps you. Basic SQL statements are the same for all SQL dialects. So once you know one SQL dialect, you can easily learn others. So basically, SQL is the same among all the different versions. You're going to have a select statement, or a create statement, etc. So those are all the same, but there may be different dialects. So how you create one might be a little different from one DBMS to another. So how knowing standard SQL does not help you. So any non-trivial application will require modification when moved from one SQL database to another. So that's how it does not help you. So it's good to learn SQL. So the first releases, obviously, in 79 was Oracle. Then you have, in 1985, DB2. Then you have MySQL. A little tidbit of the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer that I work with at my company, his best friend actually was the inventor of MySQL. I think it was out in Finland. And then you have SQL Server, which was developed in 1987. And this was from Microsoft. So the primary platforms are Oracle, which run on Unix, Linux, and OS. This was an IBM type operating system. And then DB2, which was the OS 390 and the ZOS, and then Unix and Linux. MySQL is open source. It runs in just about anywhere: Unix, Linux, Windows, Mac, OS, everywhere. And SQL Server basically runs in Windows, and now they run in Linux as well. So these are the SQL statements. So you have a select, an insert, an update, and a delete. We'll go over that later in the semester. And then we have some SQL DDL statements. So this is more for transact SQL. So this is how you create the database and the tables, and you actually alter the tables. So in SQL, you actually have to create the tables, and then you could, delete them, edit them, do different things to those tables. So you could change the way you use your DML statements. And you could also drop a database, and create a database, etc. So these are some of the SQL statements. So you see a create database AP, so that would actually create a database. You have a create table, and it will create a table named invoices, and then it will create the invoice ID. So here's the invoice ID, and then you have the vendor ID. And as you can see, the invoice ID is a primary key and not null. That means it can never be a 0. Same thing with the vendor ID, not null. And that's one thing. One of the things with SQL is you should never use nulls. But it's there because there are some circumstances where you just have no other option but to use nulls. So this is how you create a table. So this is how you add a new column to the table. So we want to alter the invoice table and add balance due, and it's going to have a currency uh, designation. So that means it's going to be money that you're going to be putting into that column. Um, and the statement that deletes the new column. So let's say you want to delete the column balance due. This is what you would do. A statement that creates an index on the table. So let's say you want to create an index for the table, and this is what you do. Again, we'll go over all these things later in the semester. And this is the invoices based table. So you see you have your columns that were created, and then you have your rows. So those rows get created, and these vendor IDs are relational. So there's a relation here between this and the uh, table in where the vendor ID is stored, where the vendor is stored, their name, etc. So in that example, that vendor has a one-to-many relationship because it's going to have many rows here that point to that specific vendor. So as you can see, 123, that vendor, very popular. So we'll go over that. Um, Here's a select statement that retrieves and sorts selected columns and rows. Um, so this is what the result is of this select statement. So it's basically saying select this columns, okay, and name it as balance due, credit total as balance due, okay, from invoices table. Okay, so it goes into the invoices table, and wherever the invoice total minus the payment total minus the credit total is greater than 0, you you show that, and in the order of the invoice date. So you show it by the invoice date, and this is what it's showing you. And this is a statement that joins, that uses joins, and we'll go over that as well. So that joins two tables together. That's how you could get some unique results to come out. Uh, Here is, so let's say if you're a programmer and you have to get access to the database through something that you do in the program, this is how you would actually open the connection, and then you close the connection uh, to reading the database. Um, Let me come over here. Sorry, we lost our place. So here's a base table results calculated by. So these are some terms to know about SQL, and you'll learn these things throughout the semester: query, join, inner join, outer joins, add a row to the invoice tables. So this is how you add a row. So you say insert into invoices, and then it's saying, hey, we're going to insert the vendor ID, invoice number, all this information, and here's the value. Um, And then here is you change the value of a column for a selected row, and you could do that here as well. Um, and then you could delete specific invoices or specific rows, um, and select statements that's difficult to read, and a selected statement that's coded with readable style. And then here you have a select statement with a block number. So block numbers basically so this is a remark that you're putting in here. So this is for the programmer, so they know, okay, this is a query created by this person, and you could put additional information in there. This actually doesn't get run, uh, but it's good information for you to know, as you know, if you create a lot of these things. And here are some SQL coding recommendations. Start each new clause with a new line, break long clauses into multiple lines, and ident continuous lines. That way it's organized. You capitalize the first letter of each keyword for each word in columns and table names. each statement with a semicolon, and each statement with a semicolon, and use comments only for portions of code that are difficult to understand. So capitalize the first letter of each keyword. So that's a form of camel case that you use for, while you're programming your SQL. This is to create a view. So let's say if you want a view and you're going to name this view vendors min. So once you create that view, vendors min, which does this here, all you have to do is just call vendor min. And then you could have a where statement and order, etc. So it sort of makes it faster and easier to do. Also, you could create procedures. So you could say SP vendors by state, and then you create your query, and then you just call exec this here, and it makes it easier for you to, whenever you have queries that you have to reuse over and over again with a program, it just makes it much easier for you. And these are some of the stored procedures terms, such as stored procedure, control of flow language, trigger, user-defined functions, or UDF. And this is a common option for accessing SQL Server data. So this is when you have some type of application. So here you have a Java application, and here you have a .NET application. So this is the way that they go about accessing the SQL Server. So you'll have your .NET application, your ADO.NET, and that's what communicates with the SQL Server. When you're using Java, you have your JDBC, and then goes to the Java driver, and then connects to the SQL Server. Again, we'll go over this during the term of the semester. Data access model is ADO.NET and DBC for Java, and you have your database driver. This is basic ADO.NET object in a .NET application. Again, so this is a little advanced, and you will learn this later on. You have your ADO.NET terms, .NET data provider, command objects, connect objects, data reader objects, and disconnect data architecture. This is a visual basic method that's called get vendor. And so the get vendor, what it does is it instantiates a connection to the SQL server. As you can see here, connection as new SQL connection. And you use this connection that you select command as new SQL command, and then select command. So as you see, select command here, dot connection. So here are the commands that you're going to be using in order to be able to query the database. And this is for C#. So as you can see, when you're programming, you could access the database from a program. And it could be a local SQL database, or it could be a database that's stored on the web, but that's the way. So here it's a local host, but here you could actually give the IP address or the domain name of where you are connecting it to. And then this is a C# method that uses ADO.NET to retrieve data from SQL Server. So there's different ways to get access to this. So let's go to your homework assignment. So let's go over it. So you're gonna go to your website, and you're gonna download this information. And here's editing your first SQL Server coding. So here, as you can see, you're reading this information, and this is going to create database, class database. So basically what you want to do is you want to create a file named myfirstdatabase.sql. Okay, so you could create that with Notepad. So let's say Notepad here. Okay, and we get this here. Okay, and we copy, and then we paste this here. And let's save this file save as. Remember, we're saving this as my first SQL. So my first SQL. So you hit save there. So now this here is saved in your documents. Let's see where can I find it? I have a lot of stuff in my computer, as you could tell. SQL files, and my first database SQL. You can see it right here, right? So what you want to do now is you want to open up